Hello and welcome to this week's myNewsWrap. News from the SAP world, the Microsoft world, and the area in between. So let's dive into the news from what happened over the last week. And I will start with SAP and a general announcement from SAP that came out. And that was about a strategic partnership between SAP in the area of financial service industries, where SAP and an investment company called Dadig joined forces and created a new financial services industry unit, FSI, or they are planning to join on that area, where SAP will kind of carve out all the solutions that are solutions for insurances and for banking. So it's not about FI or something like that. It's really the FS, the financial services module, like claims, collections and disbursement and so on, as well as the banking stuff that they have. And with that, they want to gain speed in the area of financial services, and they think that this is the way to go. I've also referenced several further voices from like Handelsblatt or SiliconANGLE with their opinions on that move. The responses are kind of mixed. From my personal opinion, on the one hand side, I think it's a clever move from SAP because the financial services area at SAP is kind of not the best running area, and it has a very limited number of customers. And they are just participating with 20% in that area with this new joint venture. So if this FSI unit is successful, SAP will participate. If they're not successful, they got rid of some stuff that they anyway weren't really succeeding in. Well, that's my personal opinion. On the other hand, I think Luka Mucic also was cited in one of the references that he said this will not be a blueprint for future industry cloud endeavors of SAP. So this is kind of a one-shot. It's not even an experiment. So he didn't say it's an experiment. We will try that out and see if this is kind of a success story. And then we will also do that for the other industries. No, it's not that. And that kind of makes me scratch my head. If this is really, not just a move to get rid of that stuff. But that's my personal opinion. So let's see how things evolve when all the things are done. So I think that's then this new unit will be starting or plans to be starting at the end of the third quarter. So I guess at earliest at the beginning of the next year, we will see some real impact in that area. But let's see how things evolve. Quite interesting move. From my perspective, quite interesting also for partners in that area. Now, with that, let's switch to the business technology platform. There was one blog post that came out by Dennis van Kampen on the SAP Business Technology platform and the topic of security, where he brought out some blog post around wrapping up things about the sub-cloud identity services and the identity authentication services. He references other blogs, he references tutorials on YouTube, and he also has some things here around, how did he call it, tricky bits, where you might not be so successful in doing things, or where you might run into some errors that you can handle. Quite useful, I think, when you're working in that area. Quite nice wrap up on all the different topics. Then we have another topic on another blog post in the area of business technology platform with respect to the Business Application Studio. Within the Business Application Studio, you now have the option to do Vue.js development. So with the Vue.js framework, there is a template now in there. So for those of you who want to do that, that's great news. From my personal perspective, I don't think that SAP should try to position the Business Application Studio as, let's say a general purpose editor that is trying to be on par with something like Visual Studio Code, like Codespaces or IntelliJ IDE. So I do not see the necessity to have redevelopment within Business Application Studio, but that's my opinion. And I also can hardly imagine that customers requested that. But well, it's there if you're doing redevelopment, if you want to use Business Application Studio. Here you go. Now, there was another video on the area of the cloud application programming model, a short SAP samples spotlight with DJ Adams, Brian Bernard, and of course Christian Georgi. When it comes to CAP, I think he's the man. And this video is a very short, really spotlight, 15 minutes, guiding you how to make use and how to get your hands on the cloud CAP samples that are publicly available within GitHub. And for all those who love the cloud application programming model and who are eagerly waiting for a revival of the CAP conference that took place the first time last week, Volker Bussig tweeted, I think yesterday, that the recap conference will be there again this summer with a second edition. There is not too much information out there yet, so when it will be, there is no call for papers, but I think it makes sense to follow Volker and follow the official recap conference Twitter handle to stay up to date for the conference. With that, we switch to Kyma, where it was a bit quiet over the last weeks. Now the news are coming back, and I hope I see more in the next weeks. One thing that came up is now a blog post by Marco Dorn covering a new feature of the Kyma runtime on the SAP Business Technology platform with respect to the flexibility of sizing. At the moment, if you wanted a Kyma cluster on your BTP, you were quite restricted with respect to the setup. So you had kind of a minimum number of virtual machines that you could have and the maximum number. And the maximum number was quite low with 10. So you couldn't run really big workloads there. And now this limitation was removed. And you can now really size from 2 to 40. And you can really adjust now your Kyma cluster to your needs. And this blog post shortly highlights how to do that. So you can really do the settings of your autoscaler with respect to the minimum and maximum number of machines within, of course, certain boundaries, but that already gives you, I think, quite some degree of freedom. Now let's switch to the ABAP area. There is one tech talk by Josh Bentley, also called Bluebeard. And this podcast is about how to innovate with ABAP on the SAP Business Technology platform. So if you're working in an area, I would say listen to that episode. I guess you get some nice triggers. Then one last news from the SAP area. Thanks to Gregor Wolf, who kind of scans the contributions in the @SAP area and the NPM repository. A new toolkit was made available, the so-called Graph toolkit, which is basically the NPM package in order to have a command line interface for SAP Graph, which, to the best of my knowledge, will be GA at the end of this year, with a restricted scope. And this npm package now allows you to reinteract with graph on command line level. So the documentation on the npm page is not really huge, but there is a reference if you scroll down to the official documentation on graph.sap.com, graph.sap, I think it's called, where you can see what you can do with the graphctl command line interface. Now with that, let's switch to the Microsoft area. And here I also have a news that kind of perfectly fits to the news that started this session. Microsoft also accelerates its endeavors in the area of industry cloud, and especially in the area of healthcare. And it acquired Nuance, which kind of helps them to gain speed in the area of healthcare with respect to AI capabilities, because Nuance is kind of specialized in that area. Especially also when it comes to, I think, the recognition of speech and text in that area, which is very special area, of course, when it comes to the entities that are used within the language. And that's I think quite cool, and that's kind of exactly the different way to go. So SAP is carving out things, at least one at the moment. Microsoft is trying to focus the things more in their own claims. Let's see where this will lead us. Now, to the area of serverless in the Microsoft world. I have two news there, and one is really super cool from my perspective. In the area of durable functions and the durable task framework, there is a new project, or at least for me, it was new. I didn't knew about that. That's called Netherit, and Netherit is kind of an layer or an add-on that allows you to get rid of the coupling of durable functions to Azure storage. Because if you're working in the area of durable functions, you know that the state and all the events that are dealt with under the hood in the durable function framework are stored within Azure storage, and the Azure storage queue mechanism is used in order for doing the queues. And this comes with some limitations. And this new engine now supports event hubs for the eventing, and Azure page blobs for the storage of the logs and the checkpoints if work has to be resumed. That's already quite cool, because as far as I've seen, that really gives you a huge performance improvement. But there is another quite cool sentence in there that I would like to highlight. And that is, in the future, they plan to support alternatives for those components, for example, Kafka instead of event hubs, or Kubernetes persistent volumes instead of Azure page blobs. And that means that you cannot only run functions within Kubernetes clusters, but in the future, you can have some kind of a self-contained area within Kubernetes where you do serverless. And not only serverless, that's what you can do already with functions, but kind of a stateful serverless stuff, making use of really the components that you would like. And that I think is really cool. And I'm looking at you, Kyma. I think that's really something that I hope there will be some co-working in the context of SAP Embrace, for example, because this is really cool, and this is something that I personally miss within especially Kyma, because they have functions, but usually in a real world scenario you need some workflow functionality. And I don't want to go to the low code area. I want to have it in the code. And maybe this project is really cool starting point for that. So I'm really excited about that. And then this week, on Tuesday, I think, there was Azure Live, a conference on Azure topics, and Mark Düker had a talk about creating a PagerDuty clone. I referenced that project already a few weeks ago, and now you also have that within the slides. A really cool example what is possible with Azure Functions, durable functions, and durable entities. So with the whole package, which shows you that there is no limit in creating applications. Yeah, with that, some more generic news in the Microsoft area. There is one news that came out this week that is really cool, and that's about accessing data in Cosmos DB with managed identities. Now, up to now, you could use managed identities in order to do administrative stuff with Cosmos DB. So creating tables whatsoever. Not tables, they are called databases and containers within Cosmos DB. And this was possible to authenticate via ID authentication. But if you want to access the data, you always had to deal with access keys and tokens, which is kind of a different world. And now the data plane also enables the authorization via role-based access control, RBAC, which is now available in public preview, which is cool. There are some limitations, and they are mentioned at the very top of the blog. So unfortunately, JavaScript is not supported yet, but .NET. So yeah, that is, I think, really cool if you're working in that area, because that allows you to get more and more consistent and switch more and more to the role-based access control, which is kind of superior from my perspective to let's say key vault and keeping the keys there. Then I've referenced one further topic. I put that into the news from the Microsoft world. It's more a generic topic from a blog post from Heise Developer that was written by Golo Roden that I also referenced now, I think, quite some times here in this talk. And it's about the highly discussed Luca app. If you're living in Germany, you know the discussion around that app, and open source. And what I really like is Golo Roden really did a lot of work, brought out a lot of short videos on YouTube dealing with the topic of open source. And I think we all kind of know open source and what's behind that, but I highly recommend watch those videos because they really dive deeper and get a bit more, you get a lot more insight in the area of open source and what's all around this topic of licenses with open source. Now, I have to make the restriction that all the stuff is only available in German. Okay, now with that, we switch to the world between SAP and Microsoft, and I have two very cool blog posts there. First one by Martin Repler. From my personal perspective, a long-awaited blog post. And it's part 4 of his principal propagation series in a multi-cloud world. And this time, I think this kind of hits the nail. Because if you remember the other blog posts, there was a lot of components that you had to use in order to get from your, let's say, Azure app to your NetWeaver backend, making use of the business technology platform for the sake of dealing with tokens. And now this blog post got rid of the area of business technology platform, which does not always make sense to be put there in between, but makes use of the on-premises data gateway, which is kind of the cloud connector of Microsoft. And this setup, it's again a super lengthy blog and really guides you through all the simple steps. It just shows you how you can connect your Power Platform, your virtual agent, where you authenticate against Azure Active Directory with your NetWeaver backend. So that's really super useful. And then there is a second blog post that I like to highlight about SharePoint integration using SAP Cloud Platform integration. So how can you put in some integration flows there without making use of the SAP Open Connector framework, because from my perspective, I don't know if that's really necessary because the Graph API is already quite good. So the Microsoft Graph API. Yeah, so if you're kind of have such a scenario, I think it's worth to take a look at this blog post. Now with that, let's switch to the area of education and conferences. There is one blog post that I would like to highlight on becoming a certified Kubernetes application developer. As you might know, the Cloud Native Computing Foundation, CNCF, has, I think, 3 certifications around Kubernetes. Of course, administration, there is one for security, and there is one for application development. And this blog post really guides you through all the different areas that are requested within this certification. And it also gives you some tips and tricks and how to practice and so on. So that's really cool if you want to become certified in that area. Then Microsoft brought out a new learning path. And that's also cool, especially if you're working in the world SAP and Microsoft, because that's about Microsoft Graph scenarios for JavaScript developments. So how can you make use of Microsoft Graph with JavaScript, which is kind of probably the way you would do it when you try to combine SAP and Microsoft. So if you want to learn the stuff here, there are now some modules where you can walk through and make your hands dirty. Then there is one announcement that came not really out, but was kind of catched by SAP.net. Microsoft Build is now scheduled, and it will take place on May the 25th to May the 27th. On the events page of Microsoft, this is already highlighted. However, the build page per se is not yet updated, at least not at the point in time when I record this podcast. But yeah, mark your calendars, get ready for the event. I think that's absolutely cool. Then, last section for today, developer productivity. There is one thing that was released just yesterday. And it is the GitHub CLI that's already existing for quite some time, but GitHub CLI now also supports GitHub Actions, so you can you get two new commands to get insight from the CLI into your workflow runs and into the workflows per se. So you have now quite more options within the CLI. So that's kind of evolving more and more, and that's really cool. And to finish this session, I have one more thing that is interesting if you also want to get some insights around the current situation of work, as we all are doing remote work. How does this evolve? And Microsoft is really putting a lot of work in there. Well, it's not only for the sake of humans. I mean, they have their products in that area, and they want to tailor the product so that they fit the needs of the users. And there is a survey that kind of discussed things. How will we work when this pandemic will perhaps finally end? And well, it's quite interesting what came out there, and it's also interesting how the usage of, for example, Teams and chats changed over now a year that we are working more or less remotely. So that's really interesting. I referenced that in the show notes, so take a look. with that, I'm at the end of today's session. I hope I had some interesting news from you. And yeah, with that, I wish you a nice Friday, a nice weekend, and see you next week. Till then, bye.